Hello, I'm Mr. Z, the storyteller, and I have a story for you that has something to do with Hanukkah, which happens to be going on right now. If you're not Jewish, you may think Hanukkah is just the Jewish Christmas. Well, it may have been influenced by Christmas in some respects, but it really doesn't have anything to do with it. Hanukkah celebrates the taking over of the temple by the Maccabees, Jewish warriors, from the Greek rulers who were prohibiting Jews from worshiping in the way they knew was right. And when they took over the temple, unfortunately, there was only enough oil to light the sacred lamp for one day, but miraculously, the oil lasted for 8 days until they could get a new supply, and that's why Hanukkah lasts for 8 days. Among the things that people like to do at Hanukkah is play with a dreidel, which is a wooden top that has square sides, each with a letter that has something to do with the liberation of the temple. And Gimel, that letter, is the one where the winner takes the whole pot. And that's important in our story. Also, there are traditional foods associated with Hanukkah, among them latkes or potato pancakes, and they're usually served with some kind of condiment, and in the case of our story, strawberry jam, also accompanied by good draughts of apple cider. Something else you might need to know, the story is about Shlemiel. The word Shlemiel means a clumsy, awkward, or foolish person who creates his own problems through his own foolishness and often creates problems for others as well. The other thing is that the story takes place in Helm. Now, there is a real Helm in Poland where this story comes from, but I don't think the people that live there now would be very flattered about this Helm, which is legendary. To understand Helm, you need to know this little story. Once there was an angel in heaven who was charged with delivering souls of newborn babies every day, and he had one bag of wise souls and one bag of foolish souls, and he was charged not to let too many wise souls or too many foolish souls be born in one place at one time. Usually he did his job well, but one night he had a terrible problem sleeping, and he fell asleep when he was on his journey in the air, and suddenly he woke up just before he came to the point of a mountain and was about to crash by spreading his wings. Luckily, he didn't crash, but unfortunately, he was flying so low that one bag tore on the sharp top of a pine tree, and all of the foolish souls spilled out in one place, and that's how Helm was born. This story is called The First Shlemiel, and I learned it by reading the story in a book by Isaac Bashevis Singer. There are many Shlemiels in the world, but the first one came from Helm. He was lazy and foolish, never did a lick of work. Somehow he managed to have a wife, Mrs. Shlemiel, and they had a baby, little Shlemiel, and a pet rooster they kept inside with them. Now, because he was lazy and foolish and made no money, the only way they had any coins at all to rub together was that Mrs. Shlemiel raised vegetables in a garden, and every morning during season she would take those vegetables to the market and sell them for whatever little profit she could make. Now, besides being lazy and foolish, Shlemiel had a terrible sweet tooth. It was coming on Hannukah, and Mrs. Shlemiel had prepared a pot of strawberry jam for their potato pancakes. She was worried that if Shlemiel got a taste of it, he wouldn't quit till he'd eaten it all and spoil their holidays. So, one morning when she was getting up to get ready for market, she roused her husband. "Shlemiel, wake up!" "Yes, dear, what is it?" "I'm headed to the market, and I have 3 very important things to tell you. Are you listening?" Oh, I'm all ears, dear," said Shlemiel. "First, take care of the baby. Make sure he doesn't fall out of his cradle and bump his head." "Oh, no, don't worry. The baby will be safe with me," said Shlemiel. And second, make sure the rooster stays inside. If he gets out, you know he'll fly away and we'll never see him again. Oh, I'll make sure. Don't worry about the rooster, not one bit. Shlemiel, the third thing is very important. Yes, dear? You see that pot up there on top of the cupboards? Yes. That pot contains a deadly poison, and if anyone should taste even a drop, he is sure to die. So leave it alone. Oh, don't worry, I won't touch it, said Shlemiel, and Mrs. Shlemiel went off to market. Shlemiel put little Shlemiel in his cradle. He sat himself in a rocking chair nearby and rocked the baby with his foot as he rocked himself, and sang a lullaby to put little Shlemiel to sleep. I am a big Shlemiel, and you are a little Shlemiel. When you grow up, you will be a Papa Shlemiel, and I will be a Grandpa Shlemiel. Now, the baby fell asleep, but Shlemiel had rocked himself to sleep as well, and in his sleep he had a sweet dream. Not any more was he poor and foolish, but he was rich and wise. Why, he could make the dreidel stop on the winning gimble every single spin. News of his prowess spread far and wide, and people came from other villages to see his skill and wisdom. They begged him to come and live in their village and be their king. At first, Shlemiel turned them down. Oh, no, I'm happy in Helm. It's my home. But they kept begging, and finally, in one of the villages, they persuaded him so well that he moved there and he became their king. They set him on a big throne, and Mrs. Shlemiel was now a queen. She had her own throne. They made them a giant latke and spread it with strawberry jam. And Mr. Shlemiel ate from one side, while Mrs. Shlemiel ate from the other, until their mouths met in the middle in a sweet kiss. Shlemiel was waked from his dream by what he thought was a bell. Now, the rooster had a crowing sound as clear as a bell, and it was really the rooster just crowing, but Shlemiel couldn't tell that. And in Helm, when a bell rings, generally some catastrophe is afoot, like someone's house is burning. Well, Shlemiel jumped up from his sleep and decided to go to the window to see what was wrong. He jumped up so quickly and ran so quickly that he knocked over the baby's cradle, rolled the baby out onto the floor, who bumped his head and started to cry. But Shlemiel paid no notice. He rushed to the window, opened the shutters, thrust out his head, tried to find the fire, but there was nothing, of course. Well, the rooster was watching the whole time, and while Shlemiel was looking for the fire, the rooster flew over his shoulder and disappeared behind the farthest hill in Helm. No, come back, rooster. When Mrs. Shlemiel returns and sees you gone, she'll kill me. But the rooster didn't listen. Now, Shlemiel turned around and saw the baby crying on the floor and picked the baby up and soothed him for a while, and then put him back in the cradle and started to rock him again, singing another lullaby. In my dream I was a rich Shlemiel, but awake all I am is poor Shlemiel. In my dreams I ate pancakes and jam, but awake all I eat is bread and onions. The baby fell asleep again, and now Shlemiel was left with his own thoughts. He began to worry. When Mrs. Shlemiel came home and saw the rooster had run off and the baby had bumped his head, she would be furious. When she was angry, she had a way of looking at him that pierced right through him, and she would scream at him in this terrible voice that cut right through him to the depths of his soul. He thought, life isn't going to be worth living anymore. So he decided to kill himself. But how? Then he remembered the pot of poison Mrs. Shlemiel had warned him about. So he went over to the cupboards, and he had to pull out the drawers to climb up, using the drawers as a kind of ladder because he had short, stubby legs, stood on his tiptoes, and reached down the crock and returned to the kitchen table. Sat down, opened the crock, and prepared to meet his maker. He took one taste. That poison is sweet. Now, Shlemiel had heard that most poisons are bitter, but some are sweet. Well, sweet poison definitely tastes better. I wonder how deadly it really is. Maybe I'd better have another lick. So he took another lick, and then another, and another, and he didn't stop until he'd finished the whole crock. Then he sat back in the kitchen chair and waited for his stomach to start churning, a sign that the poison was working. Well, he sat there for half an hour, and then an hour. Nothing happened. But he got really thirsty. So he went to get a glass of water, but discovered the pitcher was empty. Now, in those days, there was no tap water. You had to go out to the village pump and pump the water yourself. Shlemiel was such a lazybones, there was no way he was going to do that much work. He remembered Mrs. Shlemiel had taken their very last coppers and purchased a nice jug of apple cider that was supposed to last for all 8 days of Hannukah. Now, apple cider was very expensive in those days. But what good is money to a man who is going to die? Thought Shlemiel. So he found the jug of apple cider and sat it down, poured himself a glass, and drank it. He was still thirsty, so he poured another glass, and another, and another, and he didn't quit until that entire jug of apple cider was empty. Now his stomach started to churn for sure. He thought the poison must be working, so he went to his bed, lay down, and prepared to die. But he didn't die, he just fell asleep. And in this sleep he had an even sweeter dream. Now he was an even mightier king on a very tall throne with 3 crowns on his head, and there was a crock of potato pancakes, another crock of strawberry jam, and a third crock full of apple cider. 2 servants stood on either side of him, giving him everything his heart desired, and with their napkins daubing the crumbs out of his beard. Mrs. Shlemiel stood down below and held up little Shlemiel. Look what a mighty and powerful king your father is. What a great Shlemiel he is. How lucky I am to have such a king. How lucky you are to have such a Shlemiel for a father. But his sweet dream was interrupted by a mighty clap. Mrs. Shlemiel had come home from the market, and it was the door slamming. Shlemiel, everything is dark here. Why have you not lit the lamps, you fool? That sounds like my wife's voice, thought Shlemiel, who was shocked awake. But how can I hear her? I happen to be dead. Or maybe I'm not dead. Mrs. Shlemiel had lit the lamps. She had looked around at all of the chaos. Shlemiel, what has gone on here? Where is the rooster? Don't tell me you let him out. And the baby has a bump on his head. Oh, you fool, don't you ever listen to me? Wife, don't yell at me. You're yelling at a dead man. You look healthy as a horse to me, said Mrs. Shlemiel. Shlemiel pointed at the pot that was lying empty on the table. The poison. I'm afraid I ate all of it. That wasn't poison, yelled Mrs. Shlemiel. That was strawberry jam. I only told you that so you wouldn't eat it all before Hannukah, and now you've spoiled the holidays. Oh, no, woe is me. What did I do to deserve such a Shlemiel for a husband? and Mrs. Shlemiel began to weep bitterly, for the holiday had been ruined. Oh no! And Shlemiel started to weep too, but they were tears of joy because he was glad he wasn't going to die. Between her bitter crying and his happy crying, they woke the baby, and the baby started to howl, which woke all the neighbors, and they came over to see what was wrong at the Shlemiel house again. By the time they got their nerves calmed down and heard the story, people felt sorry for them. Somebody had an extra pot of strawberry jam and brought it over, and someone had an extra jug of apple cider. So it looked like the Shlemiels were going to have a happy Hanukkah after all. But as always happens in Helm, when some disturbance occurs, the 7 wisest fools in Helm get together in the meeting house and decide what new laws needed to be passed. The 7 wise fools tugged at their beards and wrinkled their foreheads in the meeting house for 7 days and 7 nights. And finally they came up with this new law. A woman should never tell her husband that a pot of jam is a pot of poison, or that a pot of poison is a pot of jam, even if he is lazy, has a sweet tooth, and is a Shlemiel besides.